Welcome to Living Outside the Matrix, the philosophy show where we challenge the many modern myths in our culture. Hi there, I'm your host, Nigel Howitt, and on the show today I'd like to invite you to play a little game. Hold in mind the word anarchy and examine how you feel about it without trying to intellectualize it at all. Don't try to define it or anything. Just imagine, maybe see the word anarchy and notice how that makes you feel. What images come to mind? What sounds? How does it feel? Does it feel good, or do you feel fear? How do you feel? Where do your feelings sit on that scale? As I said, just notice and introspect without making any judgments at this stage. Okay, so what we've done there is we've contemplated an image, contemplated a concept in order to deliberately notice and to take note of our emotional response. How does that make us feel? Because our emotions can be very useful if we observe how we feel about certain things. There's a massive proviso that we must accept, first of all, that emotions are not giving us direct information about reality. They are how we feel about something. They are an estimate of whether a particular situation or event, whether that impinges upon our values or whether it supports them. So our emotions can be very, very useful. And if we notice that on contemplating something like anarchy, for example, that we feel fear, if it conjures up images of terrorists, of street violence, of looting perhaps, or bombs going off, sirens and disorder, these are the things that it does commonly suggest to people. So if these negative images come up, and these fearful emotions accompany, and these images come to mind by association with the word, that can sort of prove to us, if you like, that, or it points to the fact that we have an understanding parked in our subconscious mind, because you don't think about these things all the time. In your subconscious is written, effectively, anarchy, scary stuff, image of explosions, to be avoided. There's a negative understanding that it's bad, it's threatening. So we can use our emotional response to give us information about what we must be understanding about that concept, if you're with me. So our emotions can be a useful barometer to give us information about what we believe about certain concepts. So we have to take note of the context, and anarchy is a word that most people do not know what it means. It's simply, if we look at the Oxford Dictionary definition, it essentially has two definitions for it: an absence of government associated with disorder, and the other definition is a political ideal of the supremacy of the individual and an absence of government with no implication of disorder. So there's there's those two Oxford Dictionary definitions. The word anarchy, almost literally, I think, comes from Greek. It's been said an without, archy, rulers. But anarchy is essentially a lack of political violence. It is everybody making up their own minds, their own choices, according to their own self-interest. So anarchy is something that happens all around us every day. And my goal here is to try to show anyone who did experience negative emotions on even hearing the word that that's inappropriate, and they could benefit from reprogramming their own understanding of anarchy. We do anarchy all the time. When we meet boyfriends and girlfriends, our social mixing is entirely voluntary. There's no centrally planned agenda. It's all down to the individual, in the free market of love and romance, you could say. every aspect of our life. We choose our jobs, we choose our careers, we choose our hobbies, we choose our footwear, we choose what clothes to wear, without anybody dictating it, without any organisation. So the implied rulers in anarchy without rulers, you don't need to be ruled, to be governed, to be controlled, to have everything nailed down. I mean, this is the big point, because our everyday lives demonstrate that we do anarchy all the time without any political violence. All of these things get arranged. Everyone's social life gets arranged. Everybody gets to choose their career. Everybody gets to do the things they want without state intervention. That is pure anarchy. The free market is an example of anarchy. And it's interesting to note that the free market is also the best way of creating wealth and abundance. It's not an accident. Anarchy is all about voluntary interactions. It rests upon the non-aggression principle. I mean, that really is an expression of human rational behavior, because it's not in our rational self-interest to aggress against people, to be violent, to be a thug. Nobody wants to hang out around a thug or an idiot. It's in our rational self-interest to be honourable men, to be respected, to be honest. So there is no rational self-interest in aggressing, in bullying, in forcing, in coercing. And this is simply what anarchy is all about. And if we know and understand what anarchy is about, then we can go all gooey when we hear the word and think, wow, infinite possibility, everybody being not aggressed against. Doesn't that sound great? It means a peaceful world, essentially. So anyway, I hope this helps stimulate some thought about anarchy, and maybe also stimulate some thought about the degree of our own conditioning, the conditioning we've come through, the degree of our own susceptibility to the propaganda. So I hope that little game helped with that one. But what follows is a brief chat between myself and Jeff Berwick. I was fortunate enough to catch up with him last week while he was in London for the World Blockchain Forum. And I do hope you enjoy our discussion about anarchy. I had a piece of land. I had this small holding, about 7 acres, and naturally I wanted to live on it, move on to it, enjoy it. Beautiful piece of land. And so I did. I moved on. I thought, well, I'll take the UK government to task. Everyone says you need planning permission, and that's what they call it in this country. It's planning permission. I think, do you call it a building permit? Or I know you're from Canada, but I think they call it a building permit, don't they, in the States? It's in essence, it's the government's stamp of approval, which says you may dwell here. And so I was familiar with the UK planning legislation, which says you need to apply for planning permission. So we moved into a fantastic nest of yurts. I don't know if you're familiar with a yurt.
I just stayed in a yurt in Burning Man for the first time.
Yeah, they're great structures. It's nice to be in the round, isn't it? Mm-hmm. We put up 4 of these yurts, and we joined them into a little nest, and it was a fantastic low-cost housing solution. Really, it was a lovely place to live. And I moved in there with my wife and 2 children. And it didn't take long before the UK government came knocking at the door saying, do you have planning permission to be here, essentially? And of course I didn't. So my whole response to them, in essence, was in response to their, you must get planning permission, you must fill in these forms, put in an application. And my response to them was, I'm happy to do absolutely anything I'm obligated to, as long as you could just do me the courtesy of presenting me with the proof that shows that I'm obligated. So, if you came to me and said, hey, Nigel, you owe me 50 grand, if you were just making that up, obviously, and there's no proof, there's no paperwork, or if you represent some company and you say, you owe me some money, we'd all sensibly say, well, where's the evidence? Let's have a look at the books. And so that was the essence of my approach. It was prove my obligation. If I'm obligated, I will pay. I'm not a dishonourable man. So there was a whole load of shenanigans with the government. They kidnapped me a few times. I was dragged off to prison cells and various courtrooms. Went through the what's called the magistrate court system here in the UK, and then we sort of upped the ante and had to go to the Crown Court. And all along, essentially, my position was questioning the assumption that the state is above men. So it's a really fundamental one for anyone that's into freedom. Mm-hmm. Where do we stand? Are we free men, as indeed Americans once were, with a state that's genuinely subservient to men, there to help us and provide these services of governance, or are we second fiddle? And this was really the crux of the jurisdictional issue, to find out by the implications of the government's action what the state play is. So I was optimistic and naively basing my action on the assumption I've been told I was free. You're governed by consent, and we've all heard it said it's a free nation in England, as indeed in the States. So that was really my whole come from. But the UK government just wouldn't listen to me. It was very much a bit like my 7-year-old sort of, I'm not listening. She does that to me sometimes. And the whole argument was willfully ignored. It was I was actually instructed not to speak to the jury of 12 men and women in a Crown Court in England, and I was instructed under pain of contempt of court and being thrown into prison to specifically not speak to the jury about the issue of jurisdiction, which was why I was there. I mean, this is how insane the whole thing was. The only issue they would look at was, did he apply for planning permission? Did he jump through this hoop? And not, does he have to jump through that hoop? I mean, that was where I was trying to get to. I was trying to just rewind it a little bit. So, yeah, it's a crazy one, really. I went through the Crown Court, and ultimately the Crown Court judged that I had not applied for planning permission. I hadn't jumped through these hoops, as indeed, of course, I hadn't. I mean, it was a farce. The whole thing was a farce. But I was subsequently evicted from my home in the woods, and fined. I had to pay costs and fines to the tune of about £23,000, so it's about $33,000 US. It was a bit painful, and then getting kicked out and having to rent elsewhere. With the and the take-home point, which I got, the demonstration, the sort of de facto situation, if you like, was that the UK government considered that it didn't need to ask my permission for anything. I was their chattel. I could just be treated with as they saw fit, and that for anybody living here in the United Kingdom on the land of England is a bit of a wake-up call. It's a bit of in actual fact, we're not free, because although we're free to do many things, we can do this, we can do that, and as much like free-range chickens, as long as we don't go too near to the perimeter fence, we're fine. But when you come down to what I consider to be a crux issue of, this is my ancestral land, I inherited it from my grandfather and my father, and I'm being told I've got to ask that pile of paperwork for permission to live there. So yeah, it leaves me being unable to live on my own ancestral lands. We manage the land as a small holding, and we spend a fair bit of time there managing it for various things. But officially, I'm not allowed to live on that land, which is absolutely insane. And this was a major part of becoming an anarchist. And I think ultimately all roads lead to being an anarchist. That's a bit of a bold one. When we think things through, and when experience, really brings certain issues to bear, like, are we free? So I learned that we're not free in the United Kingdom, and it's interesting that sort of trigger a whole load of inquiries in my own mind. And the United States, the birth of the United States, I subsequently found out was the only country where people have actually enjoyed some degree of political freedom, albeit not for very long. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, you may know this, but I believe the Republic was established in 1776, and a few years later, about 7 years or so later, it turned into a democracy. But most people who live in the States now will appreciate that they're not free. Again, by de facto demonstration of the state. The state has the guns, the tanks, the tasers, the prisons. So it's really quite sobering. But I think it's really important for all of us anarchists, truth seekers, to get an accurate check on reality, accurate coordinates. Where are we at right now? Well, we're not free right now, and it's really important to distinguish the lack of political freedom with the sense of freedom. You know, I mean, you live like a free man. You do as you like. We both, I think, come from a common place where we are the authors of our own lifestyle, very much. So freedom in terms of living it is very much about that, isn't it? It's not just sort of jumping in the box or jumping how high when somebody tells you to. So it's very important to distinguish the political freedom we have and we don't have from the sense of living, you know, living as free as we can within the constraints of the farm.
Yeah, you know, that whole idea of where do you get the legitimate authority to tell me what to do with my own land is such a basic, very basic sort of thing that 99.99% of people don't even think about. They're like, well, I live here, I pay my television permits, I asked for permission to do this. And there's a number of people who've done some really interesting stuff of really going into the government court system and challenging their legitimacy. And I know of a few people who've been doing it. One of them is in Canada, Dean Clifford, and he'll be speaking at Anarchy in 2019. And another one that I really like is a guy named Mark Stevens. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah, yes, I've heard Mark Stevens. He's legal. He had a great book, didn't he? What's it? Anyway,
the book, but he's not a lawyer, but he will represent people in court, and so they'll be charged with, you know, having a tail light out or, you know, not paying whatever permits or whatever it is, and he'll start with what you say. Can you show me the proof of how you have the authority to make him do this? And he's had a number of successes, so it is possible. Apparently, when you tried to do it, they weren't having it that day.
Perhaps I wasn't quite as funny as Mark Stevens. He's pretty good.
I really don't know. Like, probably some of these judges, you know or don't know or want to stop you from waking people up, and that's why you can't talk to the jury about it. And that's a big one too in the U.S. is jury nullification. Is one of the only ways that we can get rid of some of these government laws. So if you know anyone, you get called on jury in the U.S., for example. If it's a drug case and the guy didn't hurt anyone, he just got caught with some plants in his car, basically on the jury, you can just go, this law is illegitimate. He shouldn't, not only is he not guilty, but this law is illegitimate, and you can do that. But if you do that and you actually start telling the other jurors, they will stop you from talking to the other jurors. And if you try to even hand out literature outside the courtroom, just letting them know, hey, if you're on the jury, you can decide if the law is legitimate too. They will actually kidnap you and put, because they don't want people to know this.
That was one thing I did actually manage to talk to my jury about, being very cunning with my words and careful not to mention the issue of jurisdiction. I made the point that juries have the power to literally create law, you know, in terms of overturning it, just as you say, but it didn't get me anywhere. But do you know what? I think that when they let some things go through, and there are some successes, I can't help thinking that's just part of the game to sort of bait certain people on, because it shouldn't be necessary to be as good a gift of the gab as Mark Stevens or somebody. It shouldn't be necessary to be that good with words and with the gift of the gab in order to find justice, should it? I mean, it should be simple enough for any old Tom, Dick and Harry to walk in there if he knows what's going on.
Well, that's the way the whole thing's set up, though, isn't it? Right? This whole legal system. That's why you need all these lawyers, because it's impossible. You need like 8 years of reading books to even understand what they're trying to say. Nothing is simple about it. And that's all done on purpose. And they want there to be this lawyer class. And then these lawyers, for a lot of, even if they're decent kind of people, they kind of know that if they get rid of the drug war and all this other stuff, they're not going to have a lot of stuff to do, right? So they kind of have like their own reason to continue perpetuating the system itself. And you, as a person who doesn't speak legalese, it's already like whoa, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. And yeah, they might actually let a few of these get through every now and then. I think they can't stomp down on everyone completely all the time. They have to let a few get through. They also have to allow a few of us to have like opposition to it, right? They kind of go, listen, it's a free country. Look, these two guys right now are talking about how illegitimate it is. We're not kidnapping them, right? Yeah. So there's all these different levels. I think for me personally, I think if more people would try these sort of things, and I know many courts, they won't let you videotape, but somehow get it recorded in one form or another and publicized. Yeah. And show the ones that work and show the ones that didn't work. And then as more people find out about it, wouldn't it be great if like half the court cases start with, okay, sir, you've been charged with this, and the guy goes, who are you exactly do you show me how you have authority over me? And the judge would be like, oh God, people are figuring this out.
There is one big gotcha up front, of course, and that's as soon as you're represented by a lawyer, you've conceded jurisdiction, because the government and through its legal system, it's a complicated issue, but just to scratch the surface of it here, the government and the legal system, they have jurisdiction over what are called legal fictions, the names, right, and so forth. So
like your name spelled in all capitals.
Yes, to do with the capital thing. And, yeah. But as soon as you're represented by a legal official, he's presenting the legal fiction. You happen to be standing there as surety. So it's a cunning web. The conclusion I came away with, Jeff, was that in terms of living a free life and really doing the things we want to do, I mean, I don't know about all the other guys in the free man movement, but I didn't much enjoy my experience of studying endless hours of law and all this stuff in order to represent myself, because that was the only way I could challenge jurisdiction, was to not be represented. So I had to manage my own case. But I think it's a question of picking our battles, almost. It's a question of, do you know what? I mean, there could be some merit in more people sort of throwing a spanner in the works of the legal system. I think there could well be some merit in that, as you say, but it's a question of picking our battles. And my sort of takeaway from the free man movement was the government has proved itself to be irrational to me, and this beast, if you like. It's proven to not listen to my rational argument, excuse me, can you just show me the proof? No, not listening, not behaving rationally. And just in the same way as in life, I would never advocate anyone try and reason with an irrational person. We all know from experience it's a complete waste of time. So my takeaway is not to antagonise or ruffle up the feathers of this government beast, not to prod the bear, and pick our battles.
This crazy, irrational, dangerous animal. Yeah.
Sort of pick battles, and I think there's a lot of freedom that we anarchists can promote and go away and live and share without that sort of adversarialness. So I sort of came through that legal process and sort of popped out the other side thinking, blimey, I don't want to do that again. That was painful, but it did teach an important lesson that we're not free, and I think we can be. This is a really important point. Is that I think we can, and yes, it's about all these conversations that we have. It's also about us all sort of thinking and joining these dots together. And anarchism is a great example, because as you well know, anarchism and archy without archy ruler, without organisation, without centrally planned authority, this whole concept of anarchy is so misrepresented, isn't it? It's so misunderstood. Yet I think that if people think it through enough, they can get to the point where they actually understand what it is, because there are a few classic illustrations of where anarchy works. For example, in the free market of love and romance and relationships, there's no centrally planned authority. There's no centrally planned authority dictating what jobs we all do. There's no centrally planned authority dictating what shoes we all wear. Yet somehow, miraculously, the free market manages to distribute shoes. And these are, you could go on and on with so many examples of how anarchy is in our lives, isn't it? We live anarchy. And yet, as soon as somebody mentions the concept of political anarchy, the word oh, he's an anarchist, it's like, it's all this shock horror and the threat of violence, disruption and violence and things breaking down. It's just nonsense. It really doesn't match with the facts of reality. So that's why I think if there's enough of a conversation, if enough people can get talking about all sorts of interrelated topics, and anarchy just being one of them, I think we can get free, but it'll take sufficient number of people, conscious of the facts of reality and knowing what their rights are and knowing what the political situation is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really one of awareness and of consciousness and of information. It really is an information war to that extent, and they don't want people to get this sort of information. And you'll watch this views; it'll be like 5 or 10,000 views. It's not going to be 5 or 10 million views like a Rihanna video or anything like that. But as people start to wake up, you really do start to see changes, and that's really all it takes is enough people to wake up. And it doesn't have to be everyone either. There's been a lot of looking at what you look at certain things like communism, which really didn't even exist 200 years ago. Karl Marx wrote his stupid book, and a bunch of people thought, hey, this sounds like a great idea, and it does sound pretty good. Let's try it. It really only took about 10% of the population to be interested in it before it really started to happen.
Okay.
So that's really around the number. I think it's something like 10-15%. The way that I try to describe it is if every cocktail party you go to, usually people stand around, usually it's like a group of 10 people and someone's saying a story, someone says a story. So if one guy goes, oh, I totally believe government's legitimate, if there's at least one other person there who goes, I disagree with that, you already have a bit of a conversation. But if there's another person who goes, I agree with him, and because actually most people will just go along with what everyone else says, right? Yeah. So if you got one guy who goes, I believe government, and you got two who go, I don't, and this is happening at every party, within a few weeks, no one believes in government anymore. Because the other 8 people who are standing around would go, oh, wow, this, whatever those guys were talking about, like, that's a real thing. Like, there was 2 of them at the party last night. I better figure it out. They read a Larkin Rose book, or they go to maybe watch an Anarchy. So oh, that sounds interesting. They tell a friend. Before you know it, it's pretty much already happening. And
that is exciting, isn't it? The social cross-pollination of ideas happening like that.
Yeah, and I think people are waking up to it more and more because these governments are just getting worse and worse, and that's really their Achilles heel is they're so indebted and they're just going to have worse services. They're going to steal more money. You can see how the police are just getting worse and worse, and people are starting to realize that. The one thing they don't realize is there is another option. That's just to drop out of the system. And in many ways, we live in a world of anarchy today. It's just there's a lot of really powerful mafias called governments that a lot of people still think have some legitimacy. And the less and less that people think it's legitimate, the more they just go away over time. And, there's been so many cases of people kind of doing that. And for me personally, like one of the approaches is to fight the system, right? So I got a ticket. I'm not going to pay it. I'm going to take it to court and at least fight it. And actually, I think that's fine. Pick your fights as well. And everyone's busy. But what if every single person who got a ticket all went to court over it? You'd overload the courts, and eventually they just be like, okay, forget it. It's just we can't even do it, right? So just don't adhere to what they do very easily, at the very least. Yeah. I go way beyond that. I pay them no attention whatsoever. So if cops try to pull me over, in the U.S. I probably will pull over because they will pretty much get a SWAT team and kill you. But in Mexico, I don't even stop. I'm just, get out of here. Other places, I'm the same thing. I'm like, get out of here. If someone ever does try to, say you can't do this, I'm going to give you a ticket. I'll be like, who are you exactly? Mm-hmm. And if they even start to write some sort of ticket out, I'll be like, see ya. Like, and if they did give it to me a few times, I'm just like, all right, thanks. Mm-hmm. A weird thing is that the more I do that, the less it seems to come around me. It's almost like I've got this energy around me of, you guys have no legitimacy over me, and they can kind of like sense it. And one little tip, by the way, is a lot of times, especially in the U.S., you'll get pulled over, and the guy will go, "You're going too fast. Do you understand?" The "you understand" part is actually really important. What that means is, do you stand under me? And if you go, "Yes, sir, so sorry, sir," then you have just given him permission to do whatever he wants with you. Whereas if I have that happen, I've had this happen a few times. I was standing off the side of the sidewalk in Austin, Texas. 2 cops came up, and one actually almost punched me in the ribs. And he's like, "Get back on the sidewalk." I'm like, "Who the heck are you guys?" And he goes, "You're not allowed to stand on the street. Do you understand?" I just looked at him and went, "No, do you understand?" And they both looked at me and they kind of just walked off because they're like, "Oh, he kind of didn't give us permission."
Yeah.
Right? Like we'll get someone who's easier. I'm not saying that works every time, but that's actually how it works. And same as what you just pointed out with the lawyers, I didn't even realize that by having legal representation, you're actually allowing
You're in the cage.
You're in the cage, So yeah, don't give away your power so easily.
No.
Don't be pulling down your window and thanking the cop or saying, never call them sir. Why would you call any of these people sir? I like the Trailer Park Boys. Do you know that show?
No.
Oh, it's a great show. You should look it up. And they went to court once, and he was calling the judge all kinds of things, but not Your Honor. Call these people what they are, like criminal. Like that's what I would do. Like, cop, what are you doing? You extortionist, you criminal. At the very least, like I know that some people are scared to do these sort of things, but don't just go along so easily with what they want. Now, the case of your property and not being able to live on it, a big question is going to be, though, why don't you just pay their stupid permission?
Because I can't just pay their it is not a question of just paying. I mean, I wish it were that easy. That is another one. That's my approach again. Pick your battles, and if it's just a question of pay them and be damned, I'm more than happy to do that. And in some respects these days, if I get a parking ticket, I'll just pay it. I'm not really interested in that. We have to be mindful of where we've contracted with government, wittingly or unwittingly, and to a certain extent. I'm all for driving around with confidence and dealing with police officers from the confident aspect of they are the public servant, I am the sovereign man, but I prefer to keep it to quite a respectful interaction and again just try and deal with them as little as possible. But with the so you can do that in motoring things. There was an issue with the Free Man movement a few years ago where people were trying to get their vehicles on the roads, on public highways, government-owned public highways, and sort of try to wriggle out of the contractual obligations they already had from having a driver's license, from having a taxed vehicle. So there's all sorts of hooks and strings that we're sometimes contractually bound by that we're not always aware of. So that's one. But the issue of planning is fascinating because it's just a question of they say you must ask us permission. You must ask for our permission to live here on this piece of land. And if we don't give it, that's it. You walk. You can. The land is designated, whatever it's designated, agriculture or forestry or whatever it is. Mine happens to be designated agriculture, so you can do agriculture on it or in a few different things, but you're not allowed to dwell until some bureaucrat somewhere ticks the box and says, yes, you can. And obviously, brown paper envelopes can be exchanged to facilitate that, and maybe that happens, maybe it doesn't. I don't have any personal knowledge of that, but it's certainly a system that clearly lends itself to corruption and bribery hugely. So
actually, I prefer a corrupt government over a not corrupt government.
Yeah, at least
you have an option.
Paying for the services. Yeah.
Like Mexico is great for that. It's like, yeah, you got a problem. It's like, hey, here's the money. And it just goes away.
So I'm sure in Mexico there's probably nowhere where you couldn't live if you bought a piece of land. You could just get on and build a house, couldn't you?
Yeah, like that's where a lot of people live, just in little shanties up on the side of the hill. There's really no major enforcement of anything.
This is the weird thing about planning law with respect to countries like Mexico or other third world countries, Tanzania or somewhere in Africa. They tend to be freer than the United Kingdom or the United States of America, which is bizarre, isn't it? We've gone so far down the rabbit hole through all this legal nonsense that we're not even allowed to live on our own land. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah, like the U.S. is one of the least free countries in the world today. Like, you almost can't do anything. You try to even feed homeless people, that's not allowed. Being homeless is not allowed. Like, basically, I think even suicide is illegal.
Is not voting illegal? I think that is in this country. The fact that you can be prosecuted for not participating in the political process, I just find rather funny.
Yeah, sad but funny.
It kind of comes back to the way the word anarchism has been painted so badly. It so readily conjures up negative imagery for people, and conversely, you could say the word democracy smells of roses. It's a turd that's been sort of covered, sugar coated, and sprayed with perfume.
It's mob rule.
Yeah, democracy is statism. It's pure statism, but then there's various forms of statism. But communism, socialism, fascism, they're all a situation where the state ultimately says, like they said to me, no, you can't live on your own land. You are subservient. And I think a lot of people don't realise that when they think that socialism's a good idea and they want to help everyone. I mean, helping people's great. I'm all for helping people, but not at gunpoint.
The fear that a lot of people have with anarchy, as far as I can tell, is they fear that humans aren't good enough to ever kind of get along, and that we need this overarching system. But of course, the old saying is, if all people were good, we don't need government.
That's true. There's a kind of a contradiction in there, because the idea of government and democracy in the welfare state assumes that, well, because we're all generous anyway, the state taking some and distributing it is basically just representing our own generosity, isn't it? I mean,
that's helping us do it.
Helping us do it by bringing a gun into the room, and let's help them.
And spending 90% of it on their own bureaucrat jobs and.
Absolutely. I mean, this is an interesting thing. Again, illustrates these contradictions with anarchy. People fear it, but they love it. We love to sort out our own footwear and our own relationships. But again, there's this idea that you need a gun in the room to organise people. It's just
it does work. Like, it does organize, but it's usually turns into disaster, right? Because again, if for all those people out there who are scared that humans aren't good enough to run themselves, the last thing in the world you would want, if you think there's really bad people out there, is to create something that has ultimate power, and just hope some good people want to do that. Because your average good person doesn't want to control everyone.
No.
I don't wake up in the morning and go, how am I going to control this whole city and make them do what I want to do? Like, that thought would never enter my head. There are people like that, and they will always end up as presidents and politicians.
That is hitting it on a nutshell, really. That's really such an important point, is that government is a dangerous vehicle, isn't it, that lends itself, as you said, to the
it's super dangerous. That's, the Lord of the Rings, the movie. The whole movie was about the Ring of Power. The Ring of Power being essentially government, and how hard it was, and hardly anyone can handle it. So even Frodo from the Shire, by the way, was Anarchy Town. They had all the fireworks. The mayor was setting off fireworks. They're smoking weed. But then the Ring of Power came in, and even Bilbo Baggins couldn't handle it. Frodo couldn't handle it. They could barely get it to Mount Doom to finally throw it away, to finally get rid of it. That's how dangerous it is, and that's why people say government is corrupt. But the actual fact is, government by nature is corrupt. And corrupt people will always gravitate to this corrupt system of extortion and domination and that sort of thing. So the only way to get rid of it is for enough people to wake up and not want it anymore. And it's not going to be a violent revolution.
No. It's going to be a revolution of persuasion, isn't it? We're going to have rational conversations with people, and we're going to tell them about how anarchy works, basically, in all these areas in our lives that we've identified, and how violence doesn't solve social problems. I mean, everyone pays. We all agree that, don't we? I mean, you'd be hard put to find somebody that will stand up and say, no, violence will work to solve social problems. Everyone accepts that is not true, and yet the right at the core of the idea of government, as you just said, the ring of power, is the notion that you have ultimate power. Be standing above human beings in this power hierarchy, ultimately corrupting us. It's really enlightening. I like the Lord of the Rings analogy.
Yeah, and J.R. Tolkien, the author, said he was an anarchist. So
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, actually, I read that book when I was very young and knew nothing about anarchy or anything, and it was my favorite book. Still to this day, it's my favorite fiction book. It's like this big. Yeah. And it was only until 10 years ago I realized he was an anarchist, and that the ring was signifying meaning, basically government power.
I should watch it again.
Yeah,
with renewed interest.
It's twice as good when you really realize that. And, Yeah, so that's really the case. We actually live in anarchy right now. Right in this room right now, it's anarchy. There's no cops here. There's no nothing. No one's telling us what to do. Almost everything we do is anarchy, but sometimes you go out there.
It's a testament to the power of propaganda, isn't it?
It is.
Propaganda. Some people are under the illusion that propaganda's a myth. We don't have propaganda. We live in a free country, it's a free press. The
We're
propaganda
in England,
is
the main channel is the government news channel,
BBC.
Like, if you don't know, that's propaganda.
Yeah, the propaganda is ubiquitous, and it is so proven by this fearful knee-jerk reaction, isn't it, to the concept anarchy. A couple of anarchists are having a chat in a hotel room. There's going to be an explosion soon or something. It's just such nonsense. Two people talking about the merit of us not aggressing against each other, of persuading each other, of trading, of offering value.
Private charity. Yeah. No, they've done it all on purpose. Just like they try to screw up every word, actually. Even the word liberal used to mean almost anarchist, hundreds of years ago. Now liberal means you're like basically a socialist or something. Word anarchy has been destroyed for years. Anytime there's a riot or something gets broken, they say it's anarchy. That's on purpose.
Yeah. It's really difficult, isn't it, for us to reclaim language, because as you say, that every definition of a concept is really important, that we all, we don't end up in a Tower of Babel situation, the biblical story, where everyone's speaking different languages. And that is so potentially the case, isn't it, when language starts to get destroyed by meanings being diluted. And it's really important, for us to try to cling to definitions, accurate definitions in everything we talk about and think about.
Yeah, most people they'll be arguing over a word, like capitalism. I say this all the time. They're arguing about two different things. It's like, why don't you guys define the word before you start the argument? But most people have gone to 12 years of government indoctrination camps. They don't even know how to think. Exactly. They just know how to memorize. They memorized all the dates of all the prime ministers, all the prime murderers. They don't teach how to think. No. Turn on the tele and it's the government propaganda channel, or it's football where you just drink beers for 4 hours. It's a good time. I like watching hockey or whatever, but that's basically where people are at, and they don't even realize how everything's all screwed up. But really the answer is so simple. And that usually is the case, really, in life, isn't it? That the real answer to something is usually something so simple, and basically it's don't hurt anybody. That's all you need to know.
Yeah.
Forget all the other rules. How many rules they have in the U.S. now? 100,000 or a million regulations and rules. Mm-hmm. There just needs to be one. Don't hurt anybody.
Yeah.
And that, of course, would include stealing. That kind of hurts them. Rape, that's hurting them. Murder, that's definitely hurting them. But basically, that's the one thing that if everyone just kind of agreed, that's a pretty good sort of one rule.
Absolutely.
And it's what they teach you when you're in kindergarten. It's like, don't hit, don't steal. It's like, but then they screw them up after that.
Yeah, it does. Some waters get muddied, but it is the basic, thinking in principles. I mean, that's one of the basic principles, isn't it? It ties. So what was the governmentos? You got govern is control, and the other bit comes from the Spanish word.
Well, it's originally, and some people dispute this, by the way, but it's from the Latin, and I think it's gobierna, which means govern, which means control.
Yeah, okay, so govern, control. Yeah.
And then the ment part, it is from Latin. In Spanish, mente is mind. Now, some people say, well, there was one professor who looked up what's the word for when you find out words, where they came from? It starts with an O. And no, that's not exactly what it means. It's like, I don't know, man. Govern, that's pretty easy to understand. That's control, right? Mm-hmm. Like that, pretty much we can all agree on that. Then the ment part, ment in Spanish, mente is mind. It's a Latin word. Sounds a lot like mind control to me. Even if that's not how the word came about exactly, that's what it is. It is literally mind control. Yeah.
Well, there's another underlining on that point of the propaganda we mentioned a couple of minutes ago. Government is mind control.
Well, it's funny too, because some people go to a dictionary to look at some of this stuff up, right? Who do you think decides what goes in those dictionaries? They actually took out the word anarchy, the actual definition. It used to be something quite nice. I forget exactly. Someone could maybe look it up. It was about 80 years ago, and it was something like spontaneous order, something really nice. Mm-hmm. And then about 50 years ago, Oxford or whoever those people are just put chaos, right?
Yeah.
So, you have to really look up, do your own work and figure out what's exactly is going on.
Indeed.
If you want to figure out what this whole matrix is, and that's
In terms of government being mind control, again, I think it's an interesting point that if we're at the helm of our own minds, if you like, there's a good analogy for thinking, which is like front seat driving, back seat driving. Are we at the steering wheel of our life? Are you at the steering wheel of your mind? Because I forget who said it now. It might have been Joe Marshallah, but he said that if you don't control your own mind, then somebody else will. So it's kind of like, imagine the metaphor of carjacking. Somebody sort of elbows you out of the driver's seat, gets in and takes over. But if you're actually there at the controls, thinking, working stuff out, getting accurate definitions, not necessarily trusting the first source that comes along, you have to do a certain amount of research, don't you, to even find out who you can trust and listen to. But I think that as soon as we're at the driving wheel of our own mind, I think it's much more difficult for the state or any other vested interest to get in there and sort of...
Absolutely. But most things that we actually think and do aren't actually coming from our own mind. They're coming from our subconscious, which is actually from programming we've had throughout our entire life, which even begins before birth. And actually the television programming is actually done on purpose to go into your subconscious. It's basically a form of hypnosis. Many things we do, for example, when we're driving a car, we're not actually, that's not our conscious doing that. Like no one can be doing all these things, turning on the windshield wiper, going like this, actually consciously thinking about it. Your subconscious takes over. The one thing that a lot of people don't realize is so many things that we think and do are caused by programming that's in our head that we're not even aware of. So you're right, and most people aren't even anywhere near in control of their own mind. Most things they think they believe have actually been programmed there. So that's why they get really... they're basically like hypnotized zombies for the most part, and a lot of us are too. Like this has taken me years to start to wake up. So yeah, it's a tricky question how we're going to get enough people to wake up, but I think all we can do is just keep doing what we're doing and see what happens. Sure. And you can still live a decent life as an anarchist in the statist world. I do personally. I just go from country to country. I don't pay much attention to the laws. I just do my own thing, and there's still lots of opportunities out there. You can still live a decent life even in a very statist world, but it'd be nice if we can get more people to wake up. We can actually go to a state of anarchy without most people even noticing it happened, because all we need to do is create new systems to make the old systems obsolete, and that's what things like cryptocurrencies are, right? So if enough of your average people, because almost everyone uses Uber now, right? It didn't have a big marketing campaign. It's just a guy who used it one day, went, hey, this is way better than the government taxis, and told his friends. Now there's tens or hundreds of millions of people using it. If you were to ask them, what really is Uber? They wouldn't go, oh, it's like a free market device that's way better than the government monopoly, because the government monopoly has like all these taxes and regulations and it destroys. This is like much more free market, so it works a lot better. The guy actually has incentive to give me good service. They would never say any of that. They'd go, I don't know, it's better.
Works. Yeah, it's better, it works.
So who knows, maybe Bitcoin becomes like that over the next few years. It's like, why don't you use pounds anymore? It's like, oh man, the bank, it's like a lineup and all this kind of stuff. They won't even give me my money half the time, and I just press this and I pay for things. Oh, you just got rid of central banking. Once you get rid of central banking, governments go way down in size, and then they start noticing, oh, that's weird. Like every time the government goes away in a certain area, it gets better.
Things get better. Yeah. People get wealthier.
Yeah.
Change you want to see. Be the change you want to see.